Hi, I'm Gerald Campbell, and today we're going to talk about precision instrument approaches. All right. So, what is a precision instrument approach? Right. It's an approach that's providing lateral and vertical guidance to a runway. All right. Generally, it's got lower minimums than a non-precision approach, and you can get in under worse weather as a result. So if the ceiling is lower and too low to do a non-precision approach, possibly a precision approach will get you there. All right, and we teach this because you find them throughout the entire IFR system, and in many cases, it's the preferred approach if it's available. You can get in and out of an airport, or get into an airport. So we're talking about approach. You can get into an airport under more severe weather conditions than you can normally. So a precision approach, right? We're going to be talking about the ILS. There's a couple of them. There's PAR, and then there's the GLS. However, the ILS is the most common that you'll train on for your instrument rating. All right, and the biggest difference is the fact that it's vertical guidance is available versus a non-precision, which generally does not have vertical guidance. There are some RNAVs, GPSs that do give you vertical guidance, and they're precision-like approaches, but they're not precision approaches. But they are flown much the same way. So you have a decision height or a decision altitude versus a minimum descent altitude, right? So the decision altitude, that's where you're going to make your decision on your approach. All right. Non-precision, you have a minimum altitude that you can descend to until you can make your landing. But on a precision approach, when you get to that altitude, you're making the choice: am I going to land or am I going to go around? Now, on the charts, precision approach charts, there's a lot of information. You'll notice on the non-precision that we've talked about, there is a Maltese cross. All right, that is your final approach fix. On a precision approach, it's not a point it's not a point on the map as your final approach fix. Is when you have your glide slope intercept. Okay, so that's when your glide slope comes down, your half bar deflected, and that is when you have intercepted the glide slope that will take you down to the runway. Okay, that is your final approach fix. On most charts, you have a general idea of where this will occur. You have an altitude that you'll be at, that you'll follow at a specific altitude until you intercept the glide slope, and you have an idea of where it'll happen, but it's not always the same. And it's not a particular point on the map, it is glide slope intercept. So then you follow that down. That's where you configure your aircraft, all right? And then once you configure your aircraft to that final approach fix, you want about a 450 foot per minute descent, right? Unlike non-precision, where we have trained that you can do what's called a chop and drop. You can drop 800, maybe even 1,000 feet per minute. A precision is a nice glide down to the runway, about 450 feet per minute. All right, you get to that final approach fix. Again, mandatory reporting point, call it in. And you want to establish your glide slope. You want to make sure you trim for the appropriate airspeed. You want to cross-check and adjust as necessary, okay? And you just want and if you have the aircraft configured and trimmed correctly, you can just glide it down. In my aircraft, Piper Archer, I generally fly at about 90 knots, right? So I'll trim the aircraft out. I'll put in 10 degrees flap at the final approach fix. I'll put about 1800 RPM, and that's going to give me a nice 90 knot descent at 450 feet per minute. And I can ride that all the way down to the runway. And so you want to make sure that you have everything that you need on there. Now, when you get there, like we've talked about, the decision altitude, right? So you've already done your checklist. You've done your descent checklist, your approach checklist well before this point. The final approach fix, you want to get your before landing checklist done. You have your 5 T's, all right, turn, time, twist, throttle, talk. You granted, you might not have to turn, it could might be a straight in, all right. There's not really a time for precision generally, it's an altitude thing. However, you could start a timer because there are on approach plates, they do have that option. So if you were to lose your vertical guidance, all right, on an ILS, you will revert to localizer, and that can happen. All right, but you have to be prepared for that. And at that point, that's why you start the timers, because when you're coming in on your ILS, if for whatever reason you lose your vertical guidance, well then you just shoot the localizer, the non-precision localizer approach, which generally is usually timed. Your OBS should be twisted by then, so you can go ahead and do that. And then throttle again, 90 knots, 450 foot, and then talk, notify. All right, Aerosonde 1, 2, 3, 4, final approach fix, Casa Grande runway 5. Right? I mean, it's whatever. So again, we talked about the half dot glide slope. That's when you configure, and that's your final approach fix. All right, and so you're going to write that down. Now, again, with every instrument approach, you have the missed approach point, and on a non-precision approach, we talked about you have your minimum altitude that you'll go to, and you'll ride that into to either a time or a DME, a distance, and that's your missed approach point. Well, on a precision approach, it is you go down to your decision altitude. When you get to your decision altitude, you see lights, you see pavement, you see paint. Lights, paint, or pavement, right? That's what I like to teach my students. You see lights, you see paint, runway paint, you see pavement of the runway, then you can descend to 100 feet above the touchdown zone. If you don't see that, missed approach. When you hit that altitude, you missed approach, right? So about 50 feet above that minimum altitude, if you're not seeing anything, you need to be ready, and you need to just hit that throttle, cram, climb, clean, all right, and follow the missed approach procedure. And that is how you fly a precision approach to land.